Personally, the way I describe this is that I came out of the shadows and into the spotlight. And it was a real 180 flip, because when you're in the Ministry of Defense, you can just about tell people that you're in the MOD, but in conversations with people not there, you just have to be very general and say, "Oh, it's just an admin job, nothing exciting," things like that. You can never get into the details, of course. So much of it is classified.
Under the floodlights, he saw the most exotic craft he had ever seen. It looked like two deep saucers fused together, buried 20 inches in the sand. It was roughly 30 feet in diameter, made of a dull brushed metal material. It had no landing gear, no visible damage, and a small open hatch. Inside a nearby tent, a number of 4-foot-tall humanoid figures laid out on a table.
Everybody, make sure to check out the links down in your breadbasket. Like the video, hit that subscribe button, do all the things. Go do them right now. Come find me at x.com/shotdownline.
I was told, frankly, the same as everyone else was told. No, there's no program. Nobody's doing anything. We haven't done anything since Blue Book was shut down at the end of '69. Now we know that that's obviously was not true. And clearly you wouldn't, you have ATIP and ORSAT before that. Obviously there were other things. You wouldn't have a gap where this wasn't being done. So I felt that if anything was being hidden from me, it was what the United States was up to. It's the one area where the so-called special relationship didn't really work.
And there was never a time where you thought that perhaps there was some other foreign government sort of impeding or involving themselves in your work?
No, we knew through intelligence sources that Russia and China had a program, had separate programs looking at this. But we didn't really know the details of that. And we didn't feel that there was any active interference from them in our program.
Chris Ramsay, Area 52, alien encounters with the real-life X-Files agent Nick Pope. Debriefed episode 34. I mean, pretty much as always, it's good stuff. I've become a fan of Nick Pope over the last year or so. I mean, I never didn't like him, but I've seen him on like the Basement Office with Green Street, and when I was watching the Basement Office, I thought at the time that they were kind of making fun of the subject, sorta. At least in a way, as a way of being able to talk about it, to be, bankrolled and platformed by the New York Post. Is they had to kind of be a little bit, comical about it. But then, then I learned who the fuck Green Street was. And so that just kind of put a little bit of a shadow on Nick Pope at first. But the more that I've watched him talk to people, the more I like him. And he's super engaging on X. So I don't know if it's him or not, but he replies to stuff. He's very on top of it. And he's not a dick. And he takes the burns well. So I like Nick Pope. I think he is like a real life ufologist, kind of just like he describes himself and people describe himself. Classic origin story, right? Working for the government, doesn't know anything about UFOs, doesn't want anything to do with UFOs and aliens, has no interest in that, didn't believe in it at all. right, gets assigned to be the UFO and alien guy, and so he is for however many years. And then over that course of time, he basically kind of gets convinced that, like, if UFOs and aliens aren't real things, at least the government studies them like they are. And he knows because he did it. He did the studying for the government. And he talks about in here, you know, he was really good at it, and he still is, at kind of walking the line so that he doesn't piss off his bosses. And he doesn't really work for the government anymore, but he still has really good contacts. And that's because he's always been able to kind of like not cross the line, not piss off, you know, his friends in the government or in television either. So, and there's a few times in here where he says, you know, can't talk about that, or can't tell you the details, or whatever. There's a good section here. I think it's probably towards the end. Because he's written, I guess they talked about 2 or 3 science fiction books. I've read most of the first one, like Thunderchild. I might have read it all. I don't know. And the only reason I read it is because he wrote it, you know. And so, you know, he says, like, well, they are true stories that I fictionalized. And I put him through the whole process of how the government reads through things like this and tells you you're okay to do. And there was a couple things I had to get rid of or change. So that was a really interesting part of what they talked about here, was, you know, him writing science fiction and him saying, well, yeah, it is basically real stuff that I fictionalized. So, like, that's cool. She's got, you know, 7 or 8 stories in here about UFOs and aliens. One of the really fun ones, they probably got some good graphics to go with it. Let's see. They did have good graphics. They just don't pop up very much. But, you know, this is kind of like the Richard Dolan story where he talks about the Palladians that came into the church. They'll tell a lot. And so Nick Pope's kind of Palladian story is, you know, a gal that he knew or got to know in London and England, and who ran a art supply store shop. Had a whole bunch of people come in, and like I said, I think there's a good graphic in here about this. We gotta go to the beginning though. So they have a whole bunch of people come in, and the graphic makes it look like, you know, it's like 15 or 20 or something like that. People, kind of young people. They all look very similar, and they got that, you know, they got that look, that Palladian look, which people describe as being real clean and real nice and real charming and real beautiful and real handsome. Blonde hair, blue-eyed, healthy-looking people. So a whole group of them come in, seem to be like young people to the lady. They stay there for a long, long time looking at stuff, kind of in awe. And then they bring up a single pencil and purchase it with a, you know, a large denomination bill. And then are in complete awestruckness when she gives them change. Like, as a group, they had no idea what that even is. And so I don't even think they trying to figure out what was going on there. But like I said, it's a story. It's like one of those Palladian stories. It sounds like I don't think either one of them even says Palladian, but it was kind of one of those stories that would be, has to be from the Palladian, you know, category. So, you know, this little group of young Palladians coming to London to buy a pencil to practice their, you know, Earth stuff. So that's a fun story. They talk about Randallshine, of course. Cosford. I don't think the binary thing is about either of those, but they go over the binary thing that, a guy who thinks that he receives messages from the future that are in binary, writes them down. And so part of the story that they talk about in here is he wrote down 16 pages of binary that when they decode it, tells about, a message from the future saying, check on all these places. And all the places are longitude and latitudes. And they, when you look them up, are all the places you think they are, right? Bermuda Triangle, pyramids, Machu Picchu, Göbekli Tepe, Stonehenge, Snake Mound, etc. And so part of what was fun in their discussion that Chris says is that even if you were to sit down and try and either make up or memorize or write down, even for fun, 16 pages of binary for you to write down zeros and ones, even if you just try to do 16 pages of just zeros or just ones, it would be a really tedious, kind of difficult project to complete. It wouldn't be fun for most people, probably. Another fun story that they go over in here when they're talking about Men in Black's government surveillance and covert ops is he said that he would go and recruit other colleagues to come with him on his investigations, and he would, they would talk about the Men in Black kind of motif, and he had several folks who worked with him for him kind of lean into the Men in Black motif, and so show up dressed in all black, and he was too. He dressed in all black, and so he was the Men in Black, is what he's saying. And they would show up places, and they would go to things, right? They would go to UFO conventions or whatever, and just be there. And he would always take another person. He ended up taking women because it always helped for people to kind of think that they might be a couple. And just go attend these events and talk to people and be normal and kind of casually discuss everything and anything. Not tell them that you're with the government. And so part of their fun discussion ends up Chris asking him, well, don't you see other, spooks? Don't you see other government spy people there doing the same thing? Don't you recognize them? Like, if you're a cop, I guess, or a magician, or a Men in Black guy, don't you recognize the other cops or Men in Black or magicians? And that's what they're like laughing about. They're like, yes. And I think what they're really laughing about is they're supposed to both go to Contact in the Desert, which is, UFOs and aliens, celebrity event. And Chris says he's gonna find Nick Pope at some point while they're there, and he's gonna ask him, who does he think are the spooks? Who are the spies? Who are the Men in Black weirdos in the crowd? On X, I mostly just, talk a little shit to him. Nick Pope. He says funny things, and so, you'll see on X, I say, smart-ass stuff about kind of blunt, smart-ass things. And, Nick comes back. So I like it. This is a good watch. This is much longer than expected, really, for Nick Pope. And so there's a bunch of stories in here. I think they got a solid 8 to 10 kind of UFO and alien encounters, stories that they kind of go over in different ways. So this is fun. Nick Pope, I think he's a fun guy. He's a good ufologist. He's a fun follow. He's not a bad storyteller. He's not a bad storyteller.
The whole point of the Doomsday Machine is lost. If you keep it a secret, why didn't you tell the world, eh?
On the 19th of May, 1953, something extraordinary happened in the Nevada desert. A new kind of nuclear bomb, codenamed Harry, was detonated at the Nevada test site. It unleashed 32 kilotons of energy, twice the power dropped on Hiroshima. The military at the time was running Operation Upshot Knothole, a series of nuclear tests to study how the blasts affected homes, buildings, and infrastructure. But of the dozens of nuclear devices used, it seemed that Harry, which caused the largest blast, might have had an unintended side effect. One of the engineers on site studying all of this data was a decorated World War II veteran named Arthur Stansel.
Jesse Michels, Henry Kissinger, and UFO Secrecy, The Dark Connection. This is fun. It's an hour long, 58 minutes. It's packed full of kind of really cool, what we probably would have considered mostly obscure ufology details. We don't hear people talk about Henry Kissinger a lot in ufology. It's very rare. I mean, a little bit with Richard Dolan is what I would have said before this episode. So Jesse does a good job. He's not always my favorite to watch, but this is a great episode. And he doesn't have any guests. This is just Jesse Michels going ape on Henry Kissinger. So you get the whole story, the whole origin story of Henry Kissinger, which I didn't really know at all. I don't know if I've ever actually read or seen anyone explain his military history in World War II. And so that was a pretty significant part of what's going on here. Henry Kissinger was in the army. He ends up as a very, very young person, like age 22, in charge of a whole city in Germany that was right next to von Werner's secret base. And so Henry Kissinger was super involved in securing, holding, checking out that base and the Nazis there and denazifying the city there. And so we don't spend a lot of time on that, but that's just a super interesting connection. And then all of his military connections after that seem to be related to the same kind of thread. And then you get Kissinger's education, which Jesse says wasn't him leaving the military to go into the private sector. That was just a continuation of his career in government to go, and intelligence to go to school. So he goes to school, and then all the different things that he's involved with, either just being involved with, but creating all the different boards, and his deep involvement at every stage with the intelligence community. And so that's usually where I would have run into Kissinger in the past, is kind of where the story goes next, is that he's then deeply involved at the highest parts of the government, starting with the Kennedy administration. And he's basically making the case that he was, it's probably not even a good enough description, but that Kissinger was always a CIA asset, a part of the CIA, working in the civilian government and other parts of the civilian government. But he's a mover and a shaker. He's one of the boss man. So it's not even enough of an attribution to say that he was, a CIA guy, taking orders from the CIA. And he's one of the guys giving the orders. one of the architects. And he kind of gets that far at some point. He kind of gets that far at some point. That Kissinger, almost all the people and organizations and initiatives and things that he was involved with, almost maybe everything, going all the way back to him being in charge of the little German city, is deep connection and parts of the conspiracy. So this is super informative. An hour, it's not very long. It's kind of fun. It's high energy. And it's not just Henry Kissinger, and we're going to get a lot of Alan Dulles in here. It's packed full of UFOs and aliens. From the nukes, Kingman, Roswell, etc., etc., etc. All the way up to Reagan, basically. So good stuff. It's one of the first. It's one of the first ones from Jesse Michels that I would put on the ufology required list, especially since it's kind of fun and short. Go get it.